I had every reason to walk away, but the moment I looked at her, I forgot them all. The first time I saw her, it felt like the world had slowed just enough for me to notice details I usually ignored. I was sitting in that corner cafe, the kind that smelled of roasted coffee beans and old paperbacks, nursing a lukewarm cappuccino, scrolling half-heartedly on my phone. Then she walked in. She didn't announce herself, didn't sweep across the room dramatically. She just existed. The soft fall of her hair caught the afternoon light, a cascade of chestnut with faint hints of gold, framing her face in a way that made her seem both approachable and untouchably poised. I remember thinking, almost irrationally, that she didn't look at me at all, but somehow the quiet intensity of her presence made the air feel warmer, heavier, and impossible to ignore. Her movements were deliberate, but not forced. Each step carried a confidence that came from years of knowing herself. Yet her fingers brushed against the edge of a book on the counter, as if she were afraid of disturbing something delicate. She smiled faintly at the barista, and it wasn't a practiced, polite smile. It was soft, real, the kind that hinted at a private joke or memory I would never know. My chest tightened in a way that was completely new, unfamiliar. I found myself studying her from across the room, aware of the ridiculousness of it, aware of the voice in my head listing reasons why I should just look away. She was older than me, experienced, probably untouchable. Every logical part of me shouted that I had no place in whatever quiet world she inhabited. Yet the irrational, stubborn part of me, the part that notices the subtle curl of a smile or the warmth in someone's gaze, kept looking. She ordered her coffee with a calm ease that made me aware of my own restless hands. The way she held her cup, gently cupping it with both hands, made me imagine what it would feel like if someone ever held my hands like that. Not in a rush, not for a show, just because it felt right. When she turned, her eyes briefly met mine, and I felt a jolt, subtle but undeniable, like static electricity crawling along my skin. She didn't linger, didn't give me a chance to respond, but something had shifted. I couldn't explain why, but in that instant, I forgot the reasons I should walk away. Life experience, societal judgment, fear of embarrassment, all of it vanished into the background. All I could think about was the quiet gravity of her presence and the strange ache of curiosity blooming into something more. By the time she sat at the table across the room, pulling a book from her bag and settling in, I realized I was no longer just an observer. I was part of a story I didn't yet understand, one that promised moments I couldn't plan for and emotions I wasn't ready to name. And somehow, just somehow, I didn't want to walk away. After that first afternoon, I started noticing her everywhere. Or maybe it was just that I couldn't stop noticing her. Life has a strange way of repeating small coincidences. And with her, it felt deliberate, almost fated. The next time I saw her, it was in a quiet bookstore tucked between the busy streets I usually avoided. I was scanning the poetry section, fingers brushing along spines of books I'd never read, when she appeared in the same aisle, reaching for the same volume of Neruda I'd been curious about. Our hands met briefly on the book, a light touch, just enough to make me step back and glance up at her. She gave me a small, knowing smile, the kind that didn't need words to convey amusement or acknowledgement. That moment lasted barely a second, yet the heat of it lingered, like the faint, lingering warmth of a fire after the flames have died down. I found myself imagining her touch lingering longer, the gentle press of fingers against mine that said more than words ever could. We didn't speak much, not yet. A sorry and a shared laugh over our mutual choice in poetry was all it took. But that was enough to start a pattern. Over the next few days, our paths kept crossing. She appeared at the same coffee shop I frequented, sometimes selecting a seat near mine, sometimes not. She was always calm, composed, and yet something in her presence unsettled me. Deliciously, painfully, I noticed little things. The soft crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the subtle scent she left behind in her wake, the way her gaze lingered on a page or window pane as if caught between thought and memory. One evening, we walked out of the cafe at the same time. She carried her bag over her shoulder, a subtle tilt of her head to avoid the sun, and I found myself unconsciously matching her pace. We didn't speak at first, just walked side by side, the quiet rhythm of our steps forming a language neither of us had yet named. Every now and then, our shoulders brushed lightly, a fleeting spark that made my chest tighten. I noticed the warmth of her coat brushing my arm, the subtle smell of her perfume mixing with the crisp evening air. My mind screamed at me to stop noticing these things, to stop imagining what it would feel like to be closer, but I couldn't. By the time we reached the corner where our paths diverged, she looked up at me, eyes catching the streetlight, and said something small, an observation about the weather, the light, a book she was reading. Nothing extraordinary, and yet in that ordinary exchange, I felt a quiet connection take root, delicate and real. She didn't reach for my hand, didn't linger too long, but the moment had weight, a gravity I couldn't ignore. As I walked home, I realized something I hadn't before. These encounters weren't just accidents. They were little invitations, small cracks in the walls I'd built around myself. And for the first time, I felt the pull of something that might not make sense, something that might be complicated, but I didn't care. I just wanted to keep walking this unexpected path, wherever it might lead. It started with words I wasn't expecting to hear. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft, careful, almost hesitant, like she was testing whether I was ready to listen. We met again at the little park near the cafe, the one with the worn wooden benches and the faint smell of damp earth from the morning rain. I had arrived first, choosing the bench under the old oak tree, and she came a few minutes later, carrying a book but barely glancing at it as she approached. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice low, warm, tinged with that quiet confidence that made my chest tighten. I gestured to the empty space beside me, aware of the small flutter in my stomach as she settled down. Her coat brushed my arm as she shifted slightly, a simple motion that carried more weight than I wanted to admit. We started talking about the book she had brought, its themes of loss and renewal, and somehow the conversation bled into our own lives. She spoke about changes she had gone through, leaving a long-term job, moving to a new city, adjusting to a life she had imagined differently. Her words were gentle, reflective, but beneath them lay a vulnerability that made me lean in slightly, drawn by more than curiosity. I noticed the way her fingers played with the edge of the book, tracing the spine absent-mindedly, and the way her eyes flickered to mine, hesitant but searching. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing her, not just her exterior grace, her easy smile, or the warmth she carried into a room, but the person behind it, the part that worried about being understood, that wondered if anyone could truly see her without judgment. And I realized, with a strange mix of awe and fear, that I wanted to be that person. I wanted to sit beside her quietly, to offer attention without intrusion, to be trusted with the fragility she rarely let others witness. At one point, her hand brushed mine lightly as she reached for her coffee, an accidental touch that lingered just a heartbeat too long. My pulse quickened, and I felt a strange, quiet electricity, a reminder that this connection was more than emotional, more than intellectual. But it wasn't about desire in the conventional sense. It was about recognition, intimacy, the way someone's presence could make the world feel steadier, safer, more vivid. She smiled, almost shyly, at something I said, and I caught the faint glimmer of tears in her eyes. "You listen, really listen," she whispered, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. In that moment, I realized that the barriers I had built around myself, caution, self-doubt, the endless list of reasons to walk away, were starting to crumble. As we sat there, side by side, in the quiet hum of the park, I understood something vital. Connection like this doesn't announce itself with fireworks or grand gestures. It arrives softly, in glances and touches, in the patience of listening and being heard. And even though I knew the world might see our bond as unusual, even complicated, I found myself wanting to step closer, to be part of the quiet trust that was beginning to grow between us. After that afternoon in the park, something shifted inside me. The more I saw her, the more impossible it seemed to ignore the pull she had on me. But at the same time, the reasons to step back crowded my mind like an unrelenting tide. She was older, wiser, a woman whose life experience dwarfed mine in ways I couldn't fully measure. Every cautious thought about what people might think, every imagined judgment, made me hesitate before reaching for the phone to suggest we meet again. I started noticing her absence more than her presence. On the days when our routines didn't intersect, I felt it like a quiet ache at the edge of my awareness. I walked past the cafe and almost expected to see her there, only to realize that my heart had built a habit around her presence. I caught myself imagining her laughing at something private, turning the page of a book I would never read, or sipping her coffee in that calm, deliberate way she always did. And each time, I chastised myself for letting it matter so much. We met again one evening at the bookstore, but the easy rhythm we had shared before was strained. I found myself keeping more distance, unconsciously angling my body away from hers. Her eyes searched mine, and I could almost feel the question hanging in the air. Why are you pulling away? I wanted to answer, to say that it wasn't her, that it was my own hesitation, my fear of crossing a line that society seemed to mark clearly. But instead, I smiled too quickly, nodded too much, and let the silence stretch longer than it should have. Even the small, unintentional touches became loaded with meaning. When our hands brushed while reaching for a book, I flinched inwardly, feeling both longing and guilt. Every time she leaned in to whisper a thought, I fought the impulse to lean closer, to let the warmth of her shoulder brush mine. There was a constant tension in me, the tug-of-war between wanting to reach out and the fear of being reckless, of overstepping invisible boundaries. At home, I replayed our conversations in my mind. I remembered the warmth of her smile, the way her eyes glimmered when she spoke honestly, the soft steadiness of her presence that made my own restlessness seem insignificant. And yet, alongside those memories, I reminded myself of the practical reasons I should step back. The age gap, the societal perceptions, my own inexperience in matters of the heart. I tried to reason with myself, to create a wall around feelings that refused to be ignored. And yet, the pull persisted. Even from a distance, even with hesitation and self-imposed restraint, I couldn't stop noticing her. The world felt slightly dimmer without her presence, and I realized that the distance I had forced between us was temporary. Not because I wanted it to be, but because I was afraid of what I wanted. That night, I finally admitted it to myself. Fear could not outweigh the strange, undeniable gravity she had on my life. I wanted to step closer to bridge the gap I had built, even if only a little. I wanted to see her again, to let our conversations grow, to let the quiet moments of shared space speak louder than my own doubts. And somewhere, deep down, I knew that this hesitation, this tension, was only the beginning. After days of hesitation, our encounters began to feel like a careful dance. Neither of us rushed, but the quiet tension between us had grown into something almost tangible, like the faint hum of electricity in the air just before a storm. Every shared space carried its own unspoken weight. The first subtle touch, the brief brushing of hands, became a language all its own, each gesture loaded with meaning neither of us dared voice. We were walking along the city streets one crisp evening, the sun low and golden, casting long shadows across the pavement. She carried her coat over one arm, a stack of books pressed gently to her chest, while I matched her pace without thinking. Our shoulders brushed lightly, not enough to be noticed by anyone else, but enough to make my pulse quicken. It wasn't accidental. I could feel the rhythm of our steps sinking, a quiet acknowledgement of the closeness we both wanted, but were too cautious to claim outright. Later, we found ourselves in the quiet of the cafe again. I watched her laugh at something she had read, and the corners of her eyes crinkled in a way that made my chest ache. She leaned slightly toward me, her elbow grazing mine, a contact so fleeting it could have gone unnoticed, but it didn't. I felt the warmth linger, a tiny electric current that traveled from her arm to my own, leaving me aware of every subtle movement. There was also the simple intimacy of proximity. Standing side by side in the bookstore, our heads bent toward the same shelf, I could feel the warmth of her hair brushing my shoulder. She would occasionally adjust the strap of her bag, and her fingers would brush mine as if by chance, each contact leaving me more conscious of the space between us. Her scent, soft, familiar, comforting, would hang in the air, and I found myself leaning in just a fraction closer, drawn into the gravity of her presence. One afternoon, as we walked through the park, she picked up a fallen leaf and handed it to me with a small smile. My fingers brushed hers as I took it, and the touch lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary. I felt the quiet steadiness of her energy, the unspoken reassurance that it was okay to be here in this shared space, feeling things we hadn't yet named. Even the unspoken moments carried weight. Sitting side by side on a park bench, reading quietly, sharing coffee without speaking. Her foot would occasionally brush mine. Her hand would linger near mine on the table, and each small act communicated more than words ever could. There was a tension in it, a desire tempered by patience and respect. Each touch, each glance, each brush of proximity was a step toward something neither of us dared to define fully. By the end of these encounters, I realized that the walls I had built around myself, the hesitation, and the fear of judgment had begun to crumble. Not entirely, but enough to let something new grow. Something that wasn't reckless, but deliberate. Something that was as much about connection as it was about desire. And as I walked home that evening, I found myself replaying every small touch, every quiet laugh, and every lingering look. I knew, deep down, that our story was slowly unfolding, one subtle moment at a time. That IT happened on a rainy evening, the kind where the city feels both quieter and more intimate, streets reflecting the glow of streetlights in small puddles. I had been wrestling with my thoughts all day, caught between fear and longing, between the reasons I thought I should step back and the pull I couldn't resist. I found her walking toward the cafe we both frequented, her umbrella slightly tilted as she navigated the slick pavement. The sight of her, so deliberate and graceful despite the drizzle, made something inside me shift. I knew I couldn't keep pretending my feelings were simple or controllable. We met at our usual table near the window, the rain pattering softly outside, the faint scent of coffee mingling with the cool, damp air. There was a hesitation in the way we looked at each other, a quiet tension born from days of small touches and unspoken desires. And then, without fully realizing I was doing it, I spoke. My voice was low, almost breaking, carrying the weight of everything I had been holding back. I don't know why, but being around you makes me forget all the reasons I should walk away. I admitted, the words spilling out faster than I intended. I try to fight it, I really do, but I can't. And I don't want to. She looked at me, then, her eyes wide, glimmering with surprise, something softer, something vulnerable. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the hum of the cafe fading into background noise. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. It was a light touch, gentle, deliberate, the kind of touch that carries the quiet steadiness of understanding without needing words. My chest tightened at the contact, the warmth of her skin against mine grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. I felt it too, she whispered, her voice soft but steady. More than I thought I could admit, even to myself. Her hand lingered, fingertips tracing the back of mine, and I felt an unexpected rush of calm amid the storm of emotions. There was no rush, no urgency, just a shared recognition that something real, something worth nurturing, existed between us. We sat there, hands almost intertwined, speaking quietly about what we felt, about the hesitation and the fear, about the pull neither of us could deny. Her shoulder brushed mine as we leaned slightly closer, and I became aware of the faint scent of rain and her perfume, the warmth radiating from her, the subtle rhythm of her breathing. Each detail, the tilt of her head, the soft glimmer in her eyes, the gentleness of her touch, was etched into my memory, a moment I knew I wouldn't forget. By the time we left the cafe, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Walking side by side, our hands brushed repeatedly, lingering just a fraction longer each time, as if testing the boundaries of this newfound honesty. The tension that had been building over weeks of quiet touches and glances had finally found its release, not in dramatic gestures or declarations, but in the intimate, tender acknowledgement of what we meant to each other. In that evening, in the quiet hum of a rain-soaked city, I realized something undeniable. The hesitation, the doubts, the reasons I had tried to walk away, they no longer mattered. Because the connection we had was stronger, gentler, and more compelling than any fear I could muster. And in that confession, in that shared vulnerability, I finally understood the depth of what had been quietly growing between us all along. After that rainy evening, everything felt different. The hesitation, the tension, the endless questioning, they hadn't disappeared entirely, but they no longer carried the same weight. Instead, they had transformed into a quiet understanding between us, a rhythm of connection that needed no dramatic gestures to feel real. We met again a few days later, this time at the little park where our conversations had first started. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves, and sunlight filtered softly through the trees. She arrived with a gentle smile, her coat wrapped loosely around her, her hair catching the light just as it had that very first day I saw her. I felt my chest tighten, not with anxiety this time, but with something warm and familiar, like returning to a place I had always belonged. We walked side by side, not speaking at first, just letting the quiet hum of the park surround us. Occasionally, our shoulders brushed, and each touch sent a familiar, comforting warmth through me. At one point, she reached for my hand, not deliberately, not as a declaration, but naturally, as if it had always belonged there. I took it without thinking, feeling the steady warmth of her fingers against mine, the subtle strength in her grip, and the sense of belonging that I hadn't realized I'd been craving. We found a bench near the pond, where ducks drifted lazily on the water. Sitting together, our knees touched lightly, her hand resting gently over mine. We didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, we shared small observations, the way sunlight danced on the water, the distant laughter of children, the subtle scent of her perfume mixing with the fresh air. Each small moment was heavy with meaning, a testament to how far we had come, from tentative glances to quiet intimacy. She leaned slightly against me, her shoulder brushing mine, and I felt the steady rhythm of her presence settle around me like a soft, protective warmth. I brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and she tilted her head into my hand, a small, silent acknowledgement of trust. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. It was hers. As the afternoon faded into the golden haze of early evening, we rose from the bench and walked slowly back toward the streets, still hand in hand. There was no need for grand declarations. Our closeness, our shared smiles, the ease in our movements said more than words ever could. Each glance, each small touch, each quiet laugh carried the weight of understanding, respect, and the quiet thrill of a love that had grown slowly, deliberately, and beautifully. By the time we parted for the evening, I realized that I didn't need to list reasons to stay or leave. The reasons no longer mattered. Because here, in her presence, with the warmth of her hand in mine and the calm of her voice in my ears, I had already forgotten them all. And as I walked home, I knew one thing with certainty: love doesn't always need fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, hearts slowly learning to fit together, that you find the place you've been waiting for all along.